Hello and welcome to our Digital Futures session on emerging Malaysian hybridities. This is part of a series that we've been conducting, looking at not the central places like London and New York, but actually the places from which much of the talent that goes to London and New York comes from. Malaysia has been producing a number of very significant architects and designers over the years. Including CJ Lim, who's been teaching at the Bartlett. And in fact, many of our leading schools of architecture are very hybrid spaces. They're composed of many people from different backgrounds. The term hybridity, I should mention, is something that we've explored on Digital Futures. It's a concept that the Homi Bhabha in particular talks about. And we live very much in a hybrid world. It's almost there is no culture that is untouched by others, but especially I think in the world of architecture and architecture education, many people have studied in other places and bring that with them so that their whole outlook on life is a hybrid one. Homi Bhabha himself was extremely hybrid. He was a Parsi, a Persian from a sect in India that comes from Persia, and then he moved to the UK to go and undertake his PhD, and now he's a professor in Harvard. In many ways, he sums us all up. I'd like to welcome Emma Khoo, who is going to be chairing the session today. Emma and I met on my round the world lecture tour this summer. It was great to meet her. And Emma herself studied at the Bartlett before going on to do her PhD in China, and she's now a professor in Malaysia. So, well, and everything's over to you now. Thanks for being here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Neil. And thank you so much for letting me moderate this session, the first on Malaysian hybridities on your channel, I believe. So, but yeah, it's very nice to have my university definitely had the pleasure of having you in May, and you gave us a very insightful talk of AI and architecture. And I think after that, it followed up with very interesting conversations, and it kept going whilst we took you around Kuala Lumpur. So I'm glad how some of these conversations we had probably manifested into this session now that I'm looking back at this. From post-lecture reflections, politics, Malaysian history, Malaysian food. We've talked a lot about Malaysian hybridities, I believe, before this session was even planned. So it's really fitting to host this session this month because we are approaching Malaysia's National Day on 31st August. And it's been 68 years since we have declared independence from the British. So this is a good time, not only to reflect our colonial past, and ongoing dialogues around Malaysian identity, but also to ask how that identity might be negotiated through design, technology, new cultural expressions, and now the buzzword AI would become a hot topic in conferences, doctoral research, and more in the Malaysian architecture industry as well. So that begs the question how that will change both architecture practice and education here. So our speakers today embody Malaysian hybridity, not just the interdisciplinary approaches, but also in the richness in culture that you have mentioned, and also in their experiences. Each one of them have their own ways of working, using both low and high-tech approaches through computational and digital tools, reinterpreting vernacular traditions, and experimenting across physical and virtual realms. And of course, we have educators here, basically how they might be shaping teaching pedagogies for the next generation as well. And I'm really excited to moderate and invite our 5 speakers to the Emerging Malaysian Hybridity session. I trust we'll have a very diverse and insightful dialogue on how hybrid practices has redefined Malaysian identity and reshaped the future of our architectural practice and education here. So without further ado, let's start. And let me introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Suffian Shahabuddin, founder and principal of 6 Design Office, 6 with the letter 6 IX Design Office in Kuala Lumpur. With over 18 years of professional experience, Suffian's career has spanned across Australia, Ireland, China, Vietnam, the Philippines, and Malaysia, where he has led projects in healthcare, commercial, residential, and institutional sectors. Early in his journey, he was awarded the 2002 PAM Student Design Award and represented Malaysia at the UIA Biennale the same year, marking the beginning of his commitment to architectural innovation and discourse. Today, that same commitment drives his work in advancing design practices, particularly in championing the BIM adoption and transformation across businesses and government policies. So Sufyan's perspective goes beyond buildings. He has his book, Six Appeal, To Read Between the Sheets, captures a decade of design thinking, offering reflections on architecture's culture and social resonance. It's now available in selected architectural bookshops worldwide. And bridging practice, policy, and narrative, Sufyan continues to build collaborations with global partners to shape conversations on design futures. We are sure to expect exciting projects lined up. So, all right, Sufyan, please share your screen. I will
Thank you, Emma. Thank you. Let me see if this works. Okay. Just try this again. I think you can see my screen, but I'm just stuck.
Okay, I think it's moving now. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, here we go. Thank you very much, Emma. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. My name is Suffian from Six Design Office. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about our work and mostly, but I think primarily it's talking about new Malaysian hybridities and seeing how Malaysian architecture has kind of shaped conversations in terms of not only our identity designs that we have done and how it's kind of impacted social conversations. So tonight I'll be talking about design in Malaysia's public consciousness, because I think this is something that goes a bit unheard of. It's not mainstream conversations, but I think what we want to do as designers is try to make it more at the forefront of public conversation. So my experience having practiced, studied in Melbourne for over a decade, I decided to come back to Malaysia somewhere around 2013 and set up a design practice. And so we've kind of followed through with the next decade, experimenting in terms of how we would develop the work that we did, and found out that our skill sets was kind of more sought after abroad. So I think with the evolution of technology, remote working, we found that we could still have the best of what Malaysia offered, but still provided and worked on projects abroad. So we've done projects in the UK, a lot of Australia, and even some parts of Dubai. So I think that's kind of informed the work that we do. Tonight, I'll probably be talking more about the work that we've done in Malaysia. And I think it's trying to see where we're at and where we could go, especially with the ever-changing built environment, which is constantly informed by digital transformation. So I wanted to start by this slide. I think it's a series of images by Katerina Camprani, which is titled "The Uncomfortable." But I think in terms of design, it's a good representation of how sometimes design isn't utilized in the best of ways. It doesn't go beyond aesthetics. It might look good in terms of how you're seeing it, but in terms of functionality, it leaves a lot to be desired. And I think in some aspects, design is kind of like that in Malaysia. You'd see all these flashy buildings, but at the same time, it's very hard to see how they can impact or even provide positive reinforcements to kind of progress the conversations on architecture in Malaysia. So sometimes you get situations where there's a lot of white elephant projects and even public amenities, which aren't kind of used or kind of kept in the best of environments. And I think even dealing with issues like climate change, these are things that we often kind of take for granted. And although design can play kind of a larger role, it's not necessarily utilized to the best of our capabilities and abilities to provide new ways of addressing these issues so that we provide not only better design solutions, but overall they provide a better living environment for the Malaysian society. So I think at SIX, we try to aim to create impactful problem-solving designs that add value. That's a constant process that we kind of include in the work that we do. And I think it's through this inquisitive nature of ours to kind of stay curious, evolve, and kind of keep our eyes and ears open to what's kind of changing in I think the environment of architecture, looking at technology, adapting to it, seeing what kind of suits the way we do things, and then applying it to our work. So it's not how we do it. It's not just what we do, but it's how we do it as well. Of course, there's a high tech and a low tech approach to it. Seeing a lot of the work that we do is in the virtual environment, but I think how it gets translated and built is very low tech. So these are things that we constantly deal with in Malaysia, and it's trying to bridge that gap, and we're trying to do it through technology. So of course, digital transformation has kind of been, I think, the big conversation in the past decade. Um, of course, artificial intelligence, AI, has been at the forefront, especially in the last year or so, the ChatGPT. But for us, I think where we kind of got into it was through building information modeling. So BIM has been integral to how we've delivered our work. It's also allowed us to work virtually on cloud, working on different projects in different locations. But at the same time, everything is live, everything is transparent, and it gets things going. So this was further expedited during COVID, which we were kind of always prepared for because we were kind of looking at ways, how can we provide a better working environment for our staff? KL is such a big city. Some of our team members would live on the fringes, and it would, I mean, the jam sometimes would be quite a bit of a deterrence to producing better work. So I think we've kind of utilized remote working in a way, and it kind of coincided with COVID, which made us had all the I think capabilities to do the work, but being in different locations, working on similar projects on the cloud. So what we did through this was look at conventional services, but also looked at how we can kind of carve out a niche for ourselves. We didn't necessarily see ourselves as your traditional architect where you kind of needed to fulfill um, uh, the whole duration of project deliverables. So I think we kind of went in at different stages, different crucial points, and the way we saw it is these were kind of the high value areas where we could kind of contribute positively and go in and out of projects. At the same time, I think it kind of transformed how we did things, but it also provided a different angle of how we saw our work. So it was quick and fast, but at the same time, I think the shortfall was trying to see these projects in real life was a bit hard, seeing that they were in different parts of the world. So what we wanted to do was tie these different new areas of digital transformation together and seeing how we could create a new type of service. So Six Design Office was, I think, initially centered around building information modeling, but that went through transformation of our services as well that created new revenue streams, new services, and new products. So this is something that we've kind of took on board, made conscious decisions of, and saw how the market wanted different types of products as well. So using the skill sets that we had, we went back, we looked at opportunities and even ways where we could apply the way we did things, but in issues and projects that were kind of always in discussions in Malaysia. So one of it was kind of looking at the center of Kuala Lumpur, which the historical center is kind of a forgotten area. It's a forgotten space where everything is kind of shifted to the business districts. So you've got this old part of KL where not a lot of people live in, but then as we're kind of trying to figure out how can we use data um, and sort of the evidence to drive new kind of development and bring back people to the center. So we've used different strategies, scorecards, looked at policies, urban program refinements, and put it together through these platforms that we've established to create different themes, smaller sub-themes. So this provided kind of a basis for us to suggest design proposals. So it wasn't kind of your conventional sort of architectural route where you had just tracing paper on top of plans and started drawing shapes, but it was more evidence-driven, seeing what was the gaps, how we could fill those gaps, and kind of utilize whatever was there, looking at better solutions for an existing place that had quite a rich character and heritage to it. So, for example, what we found out was the center of KL, which was the convergence of two rivers, the Gombak River and the Klang River. We saw that um, I think these buildings, I think KL is kind of known for its malls, but if we looked at the existing net floor area, it's actually kind of the same of your new mall. So we found out that it was kind of about 1.8 million square feet, which is I think even if you go to some of the newer adjacent malls, this was an opportunity to look at existing structure, but a better way of curating programs into it, introducing new programs. So that's exactly what we did. We didn't want to do kind of new bigger interventions, but smaller pocket projects. And we packaged these different projects into smaller 6 themes in and about center of KL. I think the main one was actually introducing connectivity and convergence. So this was I think one of the things that we identified looking at the existing train hub, but at the same time seeing how it can be reusing the structure to introduce viewing decks, a place to converge, but at the same time appreciating the city as it was. So a new gateway that seamlessly integrates transit users and visitor experience into a robust public place. And at the same time, I think it's a development that could renew interest and bring people back to the center of KL. So this is something that's much needed. I think we're trying to figure out how can we do this more. And it is about harnessing the old with the new. The way we do things, it's slightly unconventional. Your typical, I think, industry is kind of, I think the way we are right now is a bit um, stuck or it's plateaued. What we wanted to do was look at different perspectives, overlap existing knowledge to create kind of new niche areas. So what that kind of would allow us is to kind of create broader thinking and bolder outcomes, but at the same time, I think it's kind of provided an avenue for us to explore how architecture and technology would kind of merge together to create new services. Again, some of the things that we've already done, but looking at other opportunities, branding and technology, new types of digital media, architecture and branding, and spatial branding, experiential environments. So these are things that we're constantly looking at, and we're constantly trying to work with people in and around the globe. This is one that we've worked with Warith, who's also in Dubai, looking at how we can utilize digital programming to get this placemaking strategy of an underutilized site very close to KLCC, but hasn't had anything for a while now. So we've looked at this as an opportunity to not only test how we can push the boundaries of design through modeling, but at the same time sort of create conversations with our clients to see what is an intermediate solution if it's not a longer term solution. So I think we propose something that's a temporary structure, but at the same time, it was there to provide what was missing, just a place to sit back and see the skydrop, the background of Kuala Lumpur. And I think this way of working cross-discipline, working across different borders, being cross-cultural, created a lot of conversations for us in terms of where we saw design and how it was reflected locally. So I think even with our experiences in Australia, seeing the design boom or the building boom back in the late 2000s, and I think seeing how design kind of was the talking point of everyone, it led conversations in terms of how design could play a bigger role in community building. So I think that was something missing here in KL. So what we wanted to do was establish design in public consciousness. We kind of mapped out what we thought where we're at, how design was kind of not utilized as a methodology of cultural production, but it's just taken as something that you would use just as a way of individual fulfillment. So I think we're trying to push it to be more than strategy, take it into public consciousness, but at the same time, increasing literacy so everybody has an appreciation of how design can play a bigger role for the work that we do and the problems that we face on a daily basis. So this is a personal project that we've embarked on. It's looking at, I think, the center or the heart of Malaysian life. 41% of Malaysians actually live in these terrace homes. And I think they've, since independence, they've probably gone through different generations, and I think some of them have transformed themselves in many different ways. So it's sort of borrowing from ideas from Alejandro Aravena in terms of Elemental's work. Incremental housing is something that we kind of do a lot, but I think leveraging on how we can increase the value of homes, reflect how things have kind of changed over the past few years. But at the same time, I think creating new ways of new conversations. So I'll probably just to wrap up, I think it's kind of looking at introducing new programs, but at the same time seeing how technology plays a big part in not only providing the initial clues or blueprints to set something up, but I think it's trying to figure out how we can bridge between low-tech ways of building things. So I think as we progress further, we'll probably see better ways of building through technology, but at the same time, we're trying to figure out how can we do things in a very rudimentary way, but utilizing the technology that we have at the moment. So just some images. We normally say we build things twice, once virtually and once in reality. And I think these local lessons provide us open up doors for market readiness. So another project looking at how we utilize BIM to create modular sort of components, but in an organic fashion. And I think these are things that sort of give us a point of difference. It provides us strategies where we can apply to our different collaborators and counterparts, gives us international exposure, allows us opportunities to learn. At the same time, I think what we want to do is also offer these lessons that we've learned locally, but kind of look at different opportunities abroad. So I think in essence, that's pretty much it. My version of new Malaysian hybridity. Thank you very much. Back to you, Emma.
Yes, thank you so much, Suffian. All right, so our next speaker, we'll move on to our next speaker, is Wong Leong or Leong. He is a researcher and designer whose work focuses on digital fabrication in interior design, installation, and architecture. He holds a doctorate from Tam Kang University in Taiwan, specializing in digital design rationalization and fabrication. And he is a certified Rhinoceros authorized training instructor at both level 1 and level 2. So Leong's contributions have been recognized internationally. He is a member of the Philadelphia Scholastic Honor Society of the Republic of China and the recipient of several prestigious awards, including Taiwan Interior Design Award in 2023 and the IF Design Award in 2022 for his project Static Waves. Professionally, he has served as an associate partner at Morpho Design in Taiwan and as lecturer with the Design Make organization. Leong brings deep expertise in merging research, practice, and education to push the boundaries of digital innovation within architectural and interior spaces. He's also the current head of research and postgraduate studies at UCSI University. Yep, so that's my colleague. So Leong, it's time for you to share your screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Okay. Everyone got my screen? Okay, I assume we got it. Okay. Thank you for Emma and Neil for having me to share some of the works that we have done. So thanks for the platform. I always want to be one part of the digital futures. So I will try to compile what our works have been done and to fit in the context of this session. So we are more to a fabricator in the industry of design and architecture. So I named my slide for today a touch of digital craft. Okay. So we are a small practice in Taiwan. A lot of the work is compiled in Taiwan. So we are small practice of architecture, interior consultation, but we are more fascinated into the fabrication parts. As we know, Taiwan is kind of a OEM industry. So I think that environments benefit us from exploring this kind of forms, and we try to apply these non-conventional forms of construction. As we know, construction, at the end of the day, we still need laborers to help us to build up that thing. So fabrication in others aspect, I assume they already have a lot of techniques. So we try to find out this kind of techniques, how can it be blend and be used in construction industry? So we tried a lot of CNCs and parametric design to find a new kind of style or way of fabrication techniques that build our own aesthetic. So of so many works we have produced playing with forms, we also try to find ourselves, how do we interpret our craft in the digital eras? Um, as you all know, I also do part of research in Taiwan. So I try to map to see how is the expression of architecture throughout the evolution of tools. So if you see the tools like hardware and software that we use in the construction industry and how it reflects back to the shape of the buildings. So when pre-modern eras, we know that like early 40s, 20s, when pit saws is just invented. So the shape of the material itself, the wood, we still see the texture, a lot of its characteristic is still exposed. So it's not so much refined. That's the style of architecture during that time. And along the time humanities evolve, the society try to serve different kind of needs in terms of population. So modernization, timbers or other materials goes to mass production. And we come to the digital age. So we have a lot of tools like including AI. So if you look at the materiality itself, the material tends to break away from its characteristic and the physics behind. So tools allows us to break beyond the characteristic and appears in a new kind of materials. And looking towards the evolution of era, looking at wood, for instance, so I believe this material have been long used in industry, but every era have its own zeitgeist towards this wood. For example, the timber back in very pre-modern eras, we appreciate the texture, I mean the craftsmanship of the material itself. Then when it comes to moderns, it's more on standardization to serve the mass production needs. Then I believe in digital era, it will become a trend of a morphological. So we try to use that material to breaks away from its characteristic and try to mimic some kind of shapes that being a kind of style. So having so many exploration in the industry, we also tend to find what are the zeitgeists of material along the evolution of technology. So speaking of zeitgeist, I just share some of the works or stories we encounter. He's one of the carpenter we work with. He works with chisel and saw. When we have shapes that is very difficult for him to build, we visited him in his factory. He's the one that operates the 5-axis CNC machine. So from there, our conversation are no longer from drawings, reading dimensions. All our conversations is in the screen of the CNC machine, and our discussion is about how to get the nerve surface correct and how do we change the mill to serve the curvature that we want? How do we rationalize or form to fit the machine? So I believe that is one of the zeitgeist of craft when technology intervene. So we are fascinated with curve because we play a lot with rhinos. And as you can see, we tend to showcase the characteristic of wood in a different way. Of course, we start from rhino modeling. So in this virtual screen, any forms can be built because it don't have gravity. Any shapes, any sizes, you can be just draw it with your mouse. But when it comes to build, in digital era, rationalization happens when you are in the screen already. So we are no longer having the excuse of adjust on site, yeah, because the craftsman will know how to adjust to make things work. So during this stage, we already have to understand how this thing can be built, how the machine works, and how do we let this thing to be installed, including transportation. Because at the end of the day, we don't have robots to help us fix this thing yet. I know some of them tend to let robot to replace our craft, but most of the industry, we still need manual labor for installation and transportation and all. So we figure that out, and it makes our shapes that we want to deliver easy to be built and not giving a hard time of the craftsman. So this is just a part of a feature wall in one of the interior design. Okay. We also tend to explore on different materials. Like this is a plexiglass. It all starts from one mistake of the render because somebody put another different materials on the ceiling, and it turns out the effect is very good. Then we have to crack our head to find a way to build that thing. So we test out with a small module on how to determine the curve line so that the lights can shine. We test out the small models after engraving or before engraving to form that plexiglass. Then we have to make it bigger. So it's no longer the conventional way of the CNC because the size is bigger than what the machine can provide. Then we have to find out how to rationalize this shape to build it bigger. And this is the actual fabrication process. We have to build one oven a size of a room to heat the plexiglass so that it can be shaped as what we want. And we don't rely on very high-tech technology, like a picture of the bottom left. It's just a jack, a normal car jack to just for extrusion of the shape for molding. And this is the actual size. We built one half, and the other half is actually a mirrored version so that we test out with the lights. And it also appears it's just a little part of the design as a ceiling feature of the whole interior projects. Okay. After that, we also try to find some forms that we tend to play with morphological or biomimicry kind of shapes. Then we try to use with different materials, with metals. Then during the rhino stage, we already have to find out how to fix this thing because a lot of poles will eat up a lot of our time, and the pole is in circular form. So we will have twisting position problems if you don't sort this out. So rhino stage, we already predict that that thing will happen. So we have to find a smart way to assemble this form. So after that, from virtual screen, we print out one to one size so that we know which pole is in the correct position. And again, it's also being a part of a ceiling in one of the clinics. And okay, lastly, we also try to find a way that how can we try something new? Like, can we let the machine come to work with us in the site? So as you see, this is another curvature kind of interior. So this is the one big piece of timber chunk. Design stage, as usual, rationalization. We don't want to waste a lot of the material because actual project cost does matters. So idealize the sequence of arranging the chunk so that the robots can carve this thing without too many obstacles. Yeah, we did ship one of this KUKA to the site. We test out how can workers and robots work together to carve this shape. And moving this thing into the actual site is a lot of trouble because that thing weighs more than half of a ton. And okay, these pictures I like it a lot because this is like man and robots work together. We are teaching how to let the robot to start milling as what we want. Okay, and okay, so the robots get to go to work. And okay, this is the final outcome. So as you can see, that surface is not so smooth, and you will see the breaking lines on two big chunks. And I think that is one of the aesthetic of the robots. Like if man-made carving, you will have some chips here and there because of mistakes. But I think this kind of limitation of robots it becomes an aesthetic of the robot fabrication. So I believe we think that the zeitgeist of this robots intervention to help us build the things that we all need is also part of the aesthetic that we can value. Okay, that's all. Thank you. Passing back to you, Emma.
Great, thank you so much for that. Next, we have Siti Balkish Roslan, who is an assistant professor of architecture at Sian Jiao Tong Liverpool University, where her research and teaching focuses on social architecture, decolonial theory, and coastal community resilience. A registered graduate architect in Malaysia, she investigates how participatory design can empower marginalized communities, particularly in coastal and surfscape contexts, by blending indigenous and vernacular knowledge with contemporary architectural solutions. Her work prioritizes cultural preservation, environmental adaptation, and critiques of Eurocentric spatial paradigms, emphasizing real-world applications through collaborations within the community and society. Combining her academic expertise with professional practice, she advocates for architecture as a tool for social equity, decolonial futures, and sustainable placemaking in Southeast Asia and beyond. Her recent publication, Surface Forced into a Fragmented Exteriority, appears in the Interiority Journal. Might I add, she's a PhD candidate at University of Putra Malaysia as well. Looking forward to hearing from you. Please share your screen.
Thank you so much, Emma, for the introduction. Okay, so good evening, everyone. My name is Siti Balkish Roslan, and I am an assistant professor working in China at the Department of Architecture at XJTLU. So my research interests, as Emma said, and what I mostly work on are on topics of history, theory, and heritage. So it might be a little bit different from what the other two presenters shared today. And this is through a post and decolonial theories, and I view digital technology in architecture and AI through these lens. So my sharing session today focuses more on the history and theory side and how colonization and decolonization comes into play, and how we talk about it within the digital futures. So in beginning this sharing session, I want to invite everyone to kind of think critically beyond this moment where we are in at present about a wider worldview in which we live in and how you see the digital technologies and AI shaping, fitting into and even challenging the historical and contemporary narratives. of architecture, past, present, and future. And more importantly, how you might position yourselves as advocates and also stewards of digital architecture that remains sustainable, contextual, and profoundly humanizing. And this is very important for myself and also my wider context. I think it's also crucial that we educate and cultivate ourselves with a critical understanding of AI and the digital practices of architecture. And with this reflective process, we can start and begin to develop designs that are not only functional, but also intellectual, meaningful, culturally rich, and deeply rooted in context. So when discussing digital futures of Malaysia and also the role of AI, I think it's essential first that we understand the histories and theories that shape our present rather than leaping straight into the technologies of today. And the power in wielding this digital technology and knowledge depends on the foundations from which that knowledge has been catalyzed from. Interestingly enough, much of our knowledge is based in the global south, emerges from one source, upholding one trajectory that is from the global north. So let's jump a little bit into the history and theory side of things. So this is a study that was done by Professor Fernando Lara, who is a professor from South America. And back in 2005, he did this map, and it was a recreation of buildings. So Professor Lara describes by using this map to illustrate a conceptual point. And this conceptual point is about the concentration of modern architectural knowledge. And you can see here that he marked locations of the building mentioned in 4 famous modern architecture books that were written by William Curtis, Vincent Scully, Kenneth Frampton, which is also a favorite architect of mine, Jean-Louis Cohen, and the resulting map showed a heavy concentration of buildings in the North Atlantic region and also Western Europe. And Professor Lara describes this as pornographic in its explicitness because you can see how in your face it is above the Tropic of Cancer. He argues that modern architecture is not just Eurocentric, but also NATO-centric, and that highlights the dominance of Western Europe and also the northeastern of the United States. And this visualization reveals a significant gap or voids in the representation of architectural works from other parts of the world. And those others are actually us from the global south. And this also, at the end of the day, affects our perspective of the digital tech in architecture and AI. And so now we know where most of our contemporary knowledge is from and where the knowledge base comes from. We move into the next set of information that I want to share. There is this large conceptual divide, and this is also an argument that Professor Lara talks about. And this large conceptual divide is between the global north and also the global south regarding knowledge and culture. And people often perceive that the global north, like US, Europe, Japan, Korea, are as hubs of knowledge, hubs of technology, hubs of where the digital comes from, while the global south is seen as more culturally rich, such as Malaysia, Indonesia, and interestingly, China. So this dichotomy needs to be overturned. And we also need to depolarize where architectural knowledge comes from. And this affects our perspective on how we frame the digital and also AI. So what do we have to do? I think this is the central question at the moment. I think that my suggestion would be that we would have to assert that knowledge exists everywhere, including indigenous and less industrialized regions, and what it needs, and that the global North's culture also needs to be acknowledged and criticized. And if we look at culture in a polarized perspective as how the global south is perceived by the global north, an example given is the irrational belief from the United States that more bombs that are dropped leads to greater global security, safety, and eventually peace, which is cultural rather than rational or knowledge-based. There is this large intertwining history of European colonization in the Americas, Asia, and Africa, and the development of architectural knowledge. And the tools and techniques of modern architecture were developed in the context of controlling these territories. And these developments feed back into Europe up until today through extraction, exploitation. So now we move on to another world map. I really do love maps. I think they tell a really, really large narrative, a really large story. And the line that we saw in the previous slide itself was a simple representation of the division of knowledge and culture. But when we look at it from a geopolitical standpoint, this division of the global South, this is the division of the global South and the global North. And when we understand this difference, we slowly will begin to understand the impact and implications of colonization that affects us up until today. And that is why decolonization is important in terms of knowledge and our practices, our culture, and so forth. And once we understand the implications of colonization, there can be this reversal and pluralistic approach to where culture and knowledge sits at. Here is a GIF or a GIF at the end of the 1900s where 85% of the world was colonized by North America and Europe. And Malaysia, interestingly and sadly, was colonized by 5 entities. That is the Portuguese, Dutch, Siam, Japanese, and finally the British. So European scholars, as said by one of my favorite philosophers, Said Muhammad Naqib al-Attas, he says that European scholars from various fields, when they colonized Malaysia, have studied the Malay archipelago with impressive detail and quality, and their work needs recognition. They deserve recognition, but it is not without critique, and this is what we are missing. And some of the concerns that he questions is how they develop their theories, how they interpret these complex meanings of our own culture and knowledge, and their reliance on doubts, ambiguities, and empirical facts that do not resonate with the peoples of the global South. And while they are correct in some assumptions and conclusions, there are areas where they are definitely wrong. So now begs the question, what does this have to do with today's perspective of hybridities and digital technologies in architecture? And now moving on to another map. This is, I must say, a really mesmerizing map of visualizing the internet through data collection by Karna Botnet, though it was done unethically. And that's a whole nother story. And this illustrates the daily ebbs and flow of the global net activity. And there's this great digital divide of individuals, communities, and regions that have access to modern and digital technologies. It's not just about having access to the internet. It's not as shallow as that, or devices, but also about the skills, the literacy, and opportunities to use them effectively. And there is this significant disadvantage that affects the economy, social, and the political. And if we talk about the current political situation, for example, the person who has the power gets to shape and participate who participates or controls digital democracy, activism, and information exchange. And you can see how disinformation and misinformation, suppression, and inequality is happening in today's world, especially when we talk about the Israeli and Palestinian conflict, or what I would like to truthfully call it, the genocide. And in the same breadth of this map, of this great digital divide is also the same area where most of the global South is, the global South countries are located in, is also the same area which was violently colonized, and its knowledge, culture, resources are extracted, exploited for the use of the global North, is also where the highest rates of contemporary inadequate housing, deforestation, severe threats of natural disasters, and an increasing growth of the urban population today. So in short, the digital and technological advancements and its lack thereof are where people are the poorest. So when we understand this, the architecture, history, and theory, the anti-colonial and decolonization theories, how do we actually apply this to new forms, a new form of digital tech and AI architecture? And I like to look at this in a speculative way, in forms of counterfactuals. So counterfactuals or counterfactual thinking is a what-if scenario where it can open a powerful lens of criticality engaging with digital technology and AI. So there are 2 types of counterfactuals. Well, there's many types, but some of the ones that I highlighted are upward and downward, where it's positive and negative. And some of the components that you can think about are post-human and post-digital, historical context, the architects themselves, and most importantly, the point of divergence. And let's talk about our infamous yet forgotten Cyberjaya. It's a planned city back in 1997, and it's envisioned as the Silicon Valley and part of Vision 2020. So what are the counterfactuals of the digital future when we think about Cyberjaya? If we put it in a post-digital and post-human perspective, where post-digital is the current condition where digital technologies are in an integration into a daily life and how their presence goes unnoticed because it's so integrated with us. And also the post-human, a philosophical stance where it questions traditional ways of being a human, but putting a blanket of the global South postmodern approach. And looking at a counterfactual standpoint, the baseline is when Cyberjaya was launched in 1997. So just to recap, this is the baseline where the truth is, but then the point of divergence is where the counterfactual begins. This is a what-if scenario. So the what-if scenario is, what if architecture and architects had been central to Cyberjaya's digital project and its development? And I divided it into 3 order of effects, where the first order effects looks at Cyberjaya and its hybrid typologies, where we have digital shop houses, kampong-inspired labs, adaptive AI-driven public spaces. And the second order of effects is architects cultivate critical digital literacy, embedding sustainability, hybridity, and data legibility in everyday life. And it becomes a post-digital commons, where we have a public space that is integrated highly with the post-digital instead of the ghost city that it is now. And the third order effects, where Malaysia becomes a leader in contextual and post-human smart cities, and countering the narratives to hero American digital modernism. And this key takeaway is where architects become its center. And Cyberjaya could have embodied a critical humanizing digital urbanism where post-human and post-digital thinking becomes a role in shaping our futures. And here are some counterfactuals that maybe the audience can look at. Architecture beyond humans, Cyberjaya as an ecology, university-led innovations, and urban bamboo megacities. And I think this is really important that we think in a form of counterfactual that can inform our digital futures and our use of AI. So thank you so much. This comes to the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much. All right. Our next speaker is also very interesting. His works and behind-the-scenes videos of his installations have gone quite viral recently, 1 million views the last time I've seen it. And funny enough, the digital space was where I was first introduced to his work in the first place. So the power of social media and virality. Kaiyi Wong, also known as Unreality Kai, on Instagram is a Malaysian artist and designer whose practice blurs the boundaries between art and architecture. Trained at the University of Sheffield, he founded Unreality Studio to create immersive installations that merge light, technology, and cultural narratives. Formerly with Studio Red Hongyi, Kaiyi has exhibited widely with notable works including Moonlit Dragon at Kwai Hong KL and Red Forest at the Marriott Hotel Putrajaya. His work emphasizes interaction, material experimentation, and the dialogue between the tangible and virtual. So please share your screen, Kaiyi.
Oops. Hi. Thanks, Emma, so much for the wonderful introduction. Let me quickly share my screen. Can you see my screen? Oh, shit. You guys can see my screen, right?
We can see hello there.
Okay, great. Okay, let me just oh my gosh. Okay, so a quick introduction of myself. I used to be an architect, but then I shifted to be an artist. So I do digital art and sculpture, light installations and art installations. So a little bit different from the rest of the panelists today. I don't have any like big architecture projects to talk about because I shifted to an art industry quite right after I graduated my master's degree. Although after my degree in UCSI, I actually went to to have the opportunity to went over the United States of America to have a short trip for the work and travel program where I got to really expose to the Western culture. Although it's a little bit of culture shock here and there, but I do appreciate the opportunity to really look at all the architects projects and then yeah. After that, I came back. I did practice for a while as an internship and also a full time for a really famous local Malaysia architect called Mr. Ken Yang, and he's really good at ecological, sustainable architect, and that was me and my supervisor, and it was how I feel like everybody should know architecture industry is quite harsh, and that's quite true after practicing for a while. So after that, I'll continue my studies in master in Sheffield University, and it was totally different, and it really opens my eye and of how architecture could be, and how expressive also it could be, and how playful it could be as I want. For my master, for my final thesis project, I also did something that is quite out of the box. I partnered with a friend of mine called Vicky, and she is now currently working in Singapore at Woha. So yeah, we did a joint thesis project, and it's called the Energy Proposal. It's almost envisioning the future. The site is actually at Glasgow, so we envisioning the future to be, it's a hypothetical kind of narrative that we envisioning the future, that what if we no longer using fiat money, or like dollars or Malaysian ringgit as currency. Instead we use energy instead. So how that narrative or that hypothetical scenario will look like, and how the architecture would behave, and or how like people would live under that narrative. So this is how how it looks like. So this is an energy parliament, and also we also work out some the tectonics of it. You can see it's quite, yeah, that will inform my aesthetic or my style in my art projects later on. Yeah, it's very fantastical, and it's basically like an energy market. Right now we have stock market, but in the future we have energy market, like we trade energy between countries, stuff like that. So basically that's that. After that, so basically this is almost like a journey of mine from transitioning from architecture to art. So after my master's degree, I graduated in 2020. So that was a peak of COVID, and it was not a good year. It's really terrible, man, terrible. So I have this existential crisis, because I always want to be an architect, and also I always aim to live out my dream, and also I got a pretty good grade actually from my master's degree, but I couldn't get any job. I sent out like literally like easy 30 to 40 applications all over the world, but I don't get any replies, because that time I think all the companies are trying to downsize, and needless to say, hire someone new like me. So yeah, I shifted my direction to art. And one day my friend sent me like a Instagram story from a local artist called Red Hongi, who really good at her work. So Red Hongi actually I sent my application, I got it, and that's how I got into art. But I have like zero knowledge or experience in art, and she's the one who actually showed me a lot and taught me a lot how to navigate your way into art industry. Although it kind of similar, the process is kind of similar to architecture, but somehow it is still kind of different. Yeah, and this is me. Like even the work in the work environment is very similar to a architecture practice. You know, we did a lot of research before we start a project, and also like the way we use the software is kind of similar to architecture software. We use like AutoCAD. We use you know, SketchUp, 3D modeling, and also some analysis kind of you know, a sheet to make sure the things came out as the way that we planned. So this is one of the projects that kind of like memorable. As glamorous it sounds, you know, artists doing that thing, but actually it's quite repetitive sometimes. So I've been poking like matchsticks. This is about 50,000 matchsticks that we were poking for about 3 months, no, 3 weeks. Okay, 3 weeks, in a very confined space. And then this is for a Time magazine project, and we spent like 3 minutes to burn this down. It was fun. The idea behind of it is really obvious. I guess it's very apparent. So which means no one gets to escape if there's any, you know, you talk about climate change. Like if one country started it, like all of us got affected. Yeah, you get the narrative. There's also another piece that that I was referring to, that we need to calculate how many tea bags that we're gonna use in order to produce a portrait like this. So it's back to like, you know, parametric like calculations, and they are all backed by digital softwares. Yeah. Besides that, I also use. Yeah, I also like, you know, did a lot like projects that inspired by Malaysian cultures. This is mahjong. So basically, it's the same techniques. You use digital softwares to kind of like draw the files and then carve it using laser machines and carve it onto wood and using CNC. Yeah. We also experimented with different materials. And this is also another like digital kind of like representation of how I use architecture software to create imagery of vernacular architecture that I feel like it should be more celebrated in Malaysia. Yeah. And yeah, so I also did like, you know, after that I moved on to, which I really want to do, is art installations that consist of lights. Yeah, these are like, you know, for like events, big art installations, and this is in Hong. Yeah, so these are behind the scenes again. The behind the scenes is very much using a lot like architecture softwares to calculate, you know, the strength, the structures, like how many materials we're gonna use, and also a lot of manual like labor work. And thank goodness I have really good team to help me put everything together. So like this is another piece that is quite memorable, using like a lot of lights, which also using a lot like softwares like Arduino and also controllers. So I like get to expose different kind of techniques to produce the work that I quite like. So again, you know, architecture, very architecturally like contours. Yeah. So these are like projects like sculptures, wall arts that I did, which kind of have like architecture elements in it, very tectonics. Yeah. And these are the recent projects that I did for Ipoh. Yeah, this is the Merit project that Emma just introduced just now. It's a light sculptures, but basically it's very architecture as well. So yeah, that's all. Thank you so much for your time. And finally, I would like to wrap up with, who says architecture is only about building? It can be anything as long you harness that knowledge and technology that you learn and turn it into something beautiful. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Kaiyi. I can actually relate to what you said as well. All right. Last but not least, we have Shamin Sharum, or we can call him Sam as well. He is a Malaysian artist and designer specializing in interdisciplinary practices spanning architecture, art and design. With a Bachelor of Science in Architecture from University Technology Mara and a Masters of Architecture from the University of Greenwich, Sam has an art practice running parallel alongside a spatial design practice, No to Scale, that he co-runs with Nur Nadra. Sam's art practice serves as an extension of his design practice, with a keen interest in the interplay between memory and specific spatial experiences. Sam frequently employs space and materiality as tools within his artwork. Through personal reflections and observations of the built environment, Sam's work often delves into subjects that seek to comprehend with the social psyche, collective memory, and material detritus of the city, further looking into the economic restructuring of cities and the social inequalities arising from these processes. Sam is currently based in Dubai, UAE. So, please take it away and please share your screen.
Hi everyone, hi. So I'm Sam, so I'll just quickly share my screen here. So I'm basically going to share about a book that I've just published called 100 Ways to Erect a Hoarding. It's basically a visual research document using generative imaging as a tool to process images I document in real life and then trying to expand that reality into something more imaginative that could also change the way I see the world. So this is the book. So the main ideas behind the book is that it started with an interest in image making and how they portray and influence the way we build our cities. So I photograph everyday situations in the city, and then I expand on these everyday realities through creating fictional scenarios of them and how they change the way we perceive our surroundings. So for the subject matter, why hoardings is that I basically trained as an architect, worked in the industry for quite a bit, and then I'm used to construction sites and like the idea of construction on a project. So the hoarding as a common denominator of progression in the modern city, but it's not to say that everywhere the culture of construction is the same. There are nuances. So for me, it's about testing out the nuances of image generation in context making and in meaning. So the main themes of the book is really split into four. So we have reality fiction slippage, AI imagery and perception, everyday sublime, and ideas surrounding the built environment. So it starts with me basically documenting a variety of hoardings and barriers located around Dubai, from the small to the monumental. So it's about documenting these various types of demarcations, barriers and thresholds between a site and the public. So and then what happens is that it becomes a loop of where I start to input those documented images into programs, and then it generates a number of iterations, which I then sometimes I get inspired by those images being generated, which informs me taking photos in the real world of something that looks like something that's been generated. So and then what happens is I feed it back again, and then there's this constant dialogue of me. I'm also like in a way changed slowly by the generated images that comes out, and then it's a back and forth of expanding the reality that as I see it. So one of the main themes was that I wanted to generate the everyday sublime, basically a banal or uneventful situation, but revealing beautiful or evocative qualities of the moment. An example would be like the paintings of Edward Hopper. So these are all generated, but they were fed with sites in Dubai in terms of suburban construction sites and hoardings. So what's interesting is that despite humans perceiving the image as beautiful, the algorithm itself is unable to tell the difference of quality in the images, let alone to define what makes an image sublime. So when attempting to recreate sublime through imagery, however good the image results may be, it's ultimately a reductive process of reality, but it's also subjective to my experience of what the sublime is. So moments in the real world where in that maybe in a very very cool instance that something is quite awe-inspiring and that is fleeting. So part of it is also about collapsing reality and fiction, where it's about expanding the idea of the everyday, making it quite, I wouldn't say enjoyable, but there's something quite surreal in the everyday that I want to pick up on. So there's 3 essays in the book, 3 by myself, which relates to more about the built environment, but I wanted to share quickly about 2 of the guest writers that I invited to also talk about image making with regards to their practices. So we have one, which is Amanda Aryawan, which is a curator and writer, Indonesian. So she talks about resisting the algorithm, reimagining identity, analyzing 2 artists, Morrison Alayari and Heather Dewey Harbour. So for her, identities, which are rich, complex, and fluctuating, could easily be reduced to a physical representation of herself. This is with regards to artists trying out, image generation to create works. So the image on the left, the portrait, it was generated by a Tehrani artist, Morrison, and she finds it hard to create something which has the nuances of Tehran, but also incorporates her background as someone living in France. So similar with Heather on the right, where she looks into a lot of surveillance type softwares. So for her, it's about we have to be cautious of this tendency to see models as objective representations, and rather than see them as framing identity through a particular lens of experience. So it's through the experience of the data that they are producing these images. The creation of alternative narratives by both artists show resilience against AI's homogenized tendency. So perhaps rather than subscribing blindly to what we are led to believe, what we really need is a constant act of challenging these machines that seek to understand us but fail to embody all of us as a diverse entity. So the second essay that I wanted to share is by Nathaniel. So Nathaniel is an anthropologist currently based in Switzerland. So the Unmakings of Spice Islands is basically a project using AI where Nathaniel delves into the romanticized visions of Spice Islands. Spice Islands is a term named from the 16th to 18th century of a group of islands in northwestern Indonesia, where it was mainly a hub for material exploitation, mainly the trade of clothes. So tracing how colonial and technological forces have influenced our perception of a place. So he tried to regenerate the idea of Spice Islands through a mid-journey. And what's interesting is that it always provides an external view towards Spice Islands. It's mainly like from a bow or a shape or like an aerial map. Of course, it's based on the data that it has, mainly of explorations of that time. So if we think of images as carriers of myths and stories in the way that language operates, the experiment with AI image generators raises the question, what role does language have in constructing our imaginations of the past? So basically these LLMs, large language models, are all semantic based, and who dictates the language also would sort of re-narrate the way different parts of the worlds are being presented. So it remains critical to us, whose gaze are we presented with, whose fantasies, dreams, and desires are we living in. So the ability to imagine otherwise has deep repercussions in bringing into existence a more sustainable and equitable future. So I would like to end with this quote by basically Tom Waite, which is a quite interesting quote. Basically, the treachery of AI images is a two-part phenomenon. First, it floods our lives with uncanny images that seem real at a glance but signify nothing. Then this flood of false images erodes our belief in real images, which we begin to dismiss as products of AI. So in ending this, I would like to say that especially coming from Malaysia, where our rich cultural heritage and daily nuances are not fully available as data, or where available is reduced to stereotype narratives, um, there is a possibility that cultural nuances can be lost and we become visually, culturally homogenized. But the advantage to this is that countries with rich cultural overlaps and histories can create really unique things which when we start to see AI programs for what they are, and when we return to referencing our own personal stories and narratives as the main drivers when creating. Yeah, that's it. Thank you that's it from me. Yeah, thank you.
All right. And thank you so much to our, sorry, I'll put the video on. All right. And thank you so much to all of our 5 speakers. I think I, for one, in general, just so far, because there's a lot to digest, but I think overall I do enjoy the interdisciplinary approaches of each one, and basically each one of your strengths, and also giving alternative possibilities in which architecture can take you besides the conventional route. Which is fine, of course, but I think it basically tells you there's a lot of other ways to experience or express architecture, Malaysian identity. And I think it all comes down to design thinking. And it's very interesting because all of you have been educated locally and then abroad, and whether it's to study, to work, we basically went to China, Taiwan, UK, Dubai, Australia. So I think this cultural hybridity alone is something we should celebrate and dive especially when talking about the Malaysian identity. So, right, Neil.
Yeah,
how about,
no,
yes.
yeah. Let me just. But we don't take too long because I know how late it is there, right? So, but it would be good just to follow up with some questions to try and maybe, yeah, just shake some things out. There seem to be a number of different sort of themes that ran through it. One was a straightforward, it wasn't so much a theme, but it was a practicality that every single one of you, apart from Siti, who's now working, well, actually, no, 2 of you working outside of Malaysia, but basically had studied abroad and kind of come back. And there was, on the one hand, this issue, which I think is one that faces anyone, whether you end up like CJ Lim and you end up working for your whole entire career in a university outside of your country, whether you come back and contribute to your country. I think that's the big dilemma, especially those from countries where things are not progressing as quickly as they might be. Is it worth sacrificing your career to try and make it happen, or should you stay somewhere else, and so on and so on? Another thing that came up was really the question about what is architecture, which is an interesting one in itself. And maybe I could just start off with that because I've just been in Scandinavia and giving some talks there at some conferences and things, and I was reminded by some of the things that happened there of what was happening when I was back in the UK. My first job was the University of Nottingham, not so far from the University of Sheffield, right? And I remember once I was asked by the RIBA how did I define architecture, and I at the time I said, well, architecture doesn't necessarily have to be about the design of buildings. It's about imagining a better future world. And it really depends on how you define architecture, because I was doing things then with my students that were kind of seen by some of my colleagues as not being architectural. We had, for example, one student, this is back in 1999, before Amazon took off, and he was imagining what a virtual shopping experience might be. I think he got it wrong because he assumed it was going to be a 3D experience, whereas we know from Amazon it's just a great scrolling down. But he nonetheless did imagine that. And then my colleague was saying, what's this going to do with architecture? So eventually he said, well, what it's going to do is going to reduce the number of people who are going to parking their cars in shopping malls and so on and so on. But, it seemed to be a kind of a failure of architecture to be able to open up and imagine those possibilities. What is architecture? And I think it seems to me that there are a number of things. I mean, I think to my mind, in a way, what we get as architects, and I think you've all been trained as architects, I think that's right, is a set of skills that are actually quite marketable. I mean, the fact that you're trained to design buildings, I mean, the skills that you're trained in to design, to understand a three-dimensional form and to understand material performance and so on are quite redeployable. And two of the ADs that I ended up guest editing one was on space architecture, where there are a lot of architects who worked for NASA and elsewhere. Another one was called 3D printed body architecture, which I did with Bedas Farahi, who's also trained as an architect and now working at MIT Media Lab. It was to look at how many architects were working for people like Iris van Herpen, this fashion designer, outfits and so on. And it does seem to me that it's more, architecture should really be conceived as a kind of background skill set and sensibility that could be deployed elsewhere. It's interesting that that MIT has just opened up the Morningside Academy of Design, which is precisely in that kind of logic, to see that architecture is just simply part of a broader spectrum of skills, and Paola Antonelli is another one who was in our AD on 3D printed body architecture. She's the curator of the Museum of Modern Art, Creative Architecture, the Museum of Art in New York. And she says, well, architecture is just simply part of that spectrum, and we should understand it as part of that spectrum. And so what's happening at MIT is that the Morningside Academy of Design has gone back in some sense to the model of the Bauhaus, which didn't have architecture as a discipline, nonetheless they were all becoming architects, to see how it could borrow and learn from other disciplines. So I just wanted to go and throw that out there to you, those of you who've kind of especially strayed, shall we say, from the mainstream vision of what architecture should be like, to ask whether maybe even in Malaysia, in fact, many other places, we should be rethinking what architecture is, especially in an era of AI, where frankly, jobs are going to be squeezed a lot more by AI. So let me just kind of throw that out there. What do you think those who are in charge of schools of architecture in Malaysia would make of that kind of gesture by MIT to open architecture up to a range of different disciplines and not to limit it so much to the domain of architecture? Sorry, I waffled on for too much there, but is Malaysia likely to be alert to this, or should we redefine architecture as being a more plural outlook, or how do we approach a future in which we want to use those architectural skills and redeploy them in another area? So sorry, I'm waffling a bit, but I mean, I guess the question is there are two ways of thinking. Let me put it this way. And one is, and I shan't say where this one comes from, but it's quite common that people believe in architecture with a capital A. And what they mean by that is the traditional old-fashioned view of architecture. And then increasingly, it seems to me that there are all these different, I would call them other architectures, where people come from an architectural background and start doing other things. So let me just kind of throw that out there. Is Malaysia the kind of country that would be receptive to that? You have all been doing that, but are you just simply running against the prevailing tradition and being blocked or finding it frustrating? Do you see any avenues of potentiality in loosening up our understanding what architecture might be?
Perhaps I'll direct the question first to two groups of people. Oh, three. I'll make that three, which we actually have anyway. One of our two educators to talk about what architecture education could do in terms of rethinking, restructuring what architecture actually means, whether it's in our modules or whatnot. And we have one in, Leong in Malaysia, he's in Sian Jiao Tong University, so it'll be very interesting. And the second group will be to the practitioners who can give you the better insights as to how this is being received in Malaysia. So let's off to the academics first.
Maybe I can start off. in my presentation, I think maybe a few of you noticed that there was a lot of bamboo architecture in the background because this is also part of my other works. And I also view bamboo through, a cultural, historical, heritage, and theory lens as well. My counterpart, someone I work with quite closely at XJTLU, is the one that comes with the structural knowledge. But if I were to rewind a little bit with my history with working in bamboo, it started off when I was in my previous university, which was Taylor's University. And when I introduced bamboo into a studio module, which is a 10-credit module, it was almost like an uphill battle, first and foremost, because when I inherited the previous module handbook from the previous module coordinator, it was a handbook that was already it ran for about 7 to 8 years, so there was no change there. My only thought process at that point in time was I need to introduce something sustainable, something vernacular, something that is indigenous to Malaysia. And the first thing that popped up was bamboo. But I obviously had no knowledge with bamboo, working with bamboo, and this is something that I really had to do a deep dive. The whole process of getting bamboo integrated into mainstream education, especially a studio, is extremely difficult. I didn't realize what an uphill battle it would be, mostly because I think it was a very unfamiliar material. And this was a large learning process for me in terms of an introduction of something unfamiliar, something new, yet something that we see almost every day that we don't really acknowledge, especially in terms of materiality. And it's really interesting. After the first round of using bamboo in the studio, it came a little bit easier. And throughout the years, so this program has already run for about 8 years, and it's gained a lot of attention. It's been on the media, national media. It's been adopted by other programs as well. I think that the beginning of introducing something new that is unfamiliar is definitely a really steep learning curve. And I think for people who are just about to embark on something similar as what I have done, I would say just really bulldoze through and get through it. Another aspect was also because I do teach history in the department. Framing history that is centric to the global South is something a lot of people are unfamiliar with. And when the comforts of what we know is challenged, it becomes very, very difficult to share the knowledge of what the global South is perceived at, their histories, their culture, and so forth. So this is another challenge that I feel I am going through. But of course, it is not without support of readings and discussions, and also the larger context of what I am in. So I think that when you come to a really large and thick wall, I think really the only way is just to bulldoze through. This is my experience so far on how to get things done. Yeah. Maybe Leon has some insights as well.
Okay. As being part of the academia, I always tell the students that it's okay if you don't do architecture if you graduate, because when you go into the market, it's a business. It's not so much of people appreciating your creation. And I see architecture, the things that we learn in architecture school is a skill sets. So it's not necessary where you apply in turning that skill set into something that give you profits or make money off. Like I think skills like drafting skills or the way that you present your stuff or your creation, actually it can also be working in and other fields like Neil mentioned, Iris Van Herpen, starting from parametric. That thing can be easily relate to Zaha Hadid kind of a form finding, but who knows, this thing can actually it works better in fabrics, right? Then it becomes it works in different industry. So I'm in a environment where a lot of the graduates, actually, when they graduate, they don't want to be an architect because of the housing industry is actually very low back in Taiwan. So they try to find alternative to, I won't just call it survive, but to find an interest based on what you have learned. And I noticed one thing, that the places that develop technology better is when the architecture industry is going down. For example, says robotic in Japan. They already develop robots when they have Honda, Asimo. Because of the culture, the Japanese actually don't like to depend too much on people. He don't want to trouble people. That's why robots at that time, it fits a context. That means, for example, elderly, they have this population issue where large population are going aging. So the culture in Japan, they don't want to burden their kids to take care of the elderly. That's why they rely heavily on robots. So I believe tools, something is, you design something is not for a future use or prepare us to build habitat in Mars. Sometimes it happens to find its better way. I believe COVID is one of the situation where we try to shuffle the whole thing. We will think back how people interact and how building works, and yeah, that's my point.
I mean, I just maybe could add something there, that I think, education is it's interesting to know the resistance that you met to doing certain things. I mean, I think there is the challenge right now. I mean, for me, there are many things about education that need to be rethought in a radical way. And I think we're facing particular challenges in the age of AI and the way that's going to impact upon the way that we operate in the future. I mean, we don't even know what kind of profession there's going to be in the future to begin with. And I've noticed in my own kind of limited research that the profession is much more geared up to AI, because it realizes in order to remain competitive, we all have to engage with these tools. But education often, I'm not saying it is in Malaysia, but often it's full of these dinosaurs who try and keep to the principles that they were taught in some 40 years ago. They might have done a PhD on Le Corbusier 40 years ago, and they're still talking about the same kind of thing. And you actually get a resistance to this, the kind of technological changes that are happening. I know of places, I can't say where, but where the AI has been banned, which remind me very much of my situation as a student in Cambridge, where computers were just coming coming into use, and they were banned. Which was a totally absurd situation. I mean, of course, the smart students use computers anyway, and they did a sort of hand tracing over the top. But the bad students just did it carried on the old-fashioned way, and they became unemployable. They became unemployable in a world that had radically changed. And I do think that education often operates in a kind of bubble in some senses. Anyway, but let's hear from the other colleagues. I would just say one of the guys who is I forget who it was now, who had a copy of Rethinking Architecture, which I produced when I was at the University of Nottingham, and the whole premise behind that was really that architecture was in a bubble. It needed to be burst, and we needed to import from outside certain critical skills as tools to critique and to challenge the way that architecture was perceived. And one of the things, just to say, one of the things, this is a really comment for Siti, was that one of the essays by Derrida in that in the thing it was in Rethinking Architecture, was an essay where he said there is an architecture of architecture. In other words, there is a constructed understanding of how we should perceive architecture. That's the way we should perceive it. And what deconstruction was all about was not about forms. It was by dismantling those preconceptions and challenging those viewpoints. And so the whole role of rethinking architecture was to challenge the existing framework. But it's a continual challenge, I think, for those working in education to do that kind of thing, because there's a kind of there's certain people with vested interest are just continuing on a certain tradition in a world that is radically changing. And I think that we have to accommodate those ideas. So sorry, I'm talking too much, but let's hear from the other panelists who are not teaching.
Maybe I can weigh in a little.
Yeah.
I think the way, because I come from a background where, again, we kind of thought that after acquiring certain skill sets outside and from abroad, and then coming back, you can kind of change or even input to see change happen. It may not necessarily prove to go in that direction. It's only because architecture in Malaysia has been built like a house of cards, where a lot of people have invested probably their whole careers developing something and creating this framework only for things to change, but it's beyond their control. But at the same time, how do you maintain this illusion of this house of cards so it becomes relevant in the industry? And I think that's the bigger question. Is there a way where we can switch around the cards so it does become relevant, or should we just topple it over and restart again? And I think that is a scary thought for a lot of the people in the industry. And the easier way to go about it is just to maintain status quo. So for me, I think I've kind of found it liberating that if there was a way to practice outside of constructed borders, it was kind of an open field where you could kind of practice the skill sets that you had, and it was in demand, and you just needed to go where it was needed. And from there, you can kind of shape your not only your business, but in terms of the architecture that you're looking at and want to establish in any way that you saw possible. So we're at the forefronts of how things are changing. There's a lot of questions, but there's a lot of resistance because of what has been constructed in the last decade or so in creating this idea of the capital A architecture. And I think that the pressures are just too immense, and there's for us and the industry to not change, to look at what has happened to parallel industries, car manufacturers, the battery industry, energy, for us not to take it as a sign to let's look at how we can do things differently, but we should also be conscious of how it goes back into the legal systems, accountability, and even social issues that we face on a daily basis.
Sophie, can I just pick up on one thing there? Did I misunderstand you? I just seem to detect you, maybe I got it wrong, that I think maybe some people, when they go and study in a place like the Bartlett, there's a much freer understanding of what architecture might be. I'm sure that Emma can talk about that. And then when you come back home, you're kind of straitjacketed into a much more architecture with a capital A outlook. Is that what was behind what you were saying?
Yeah, pretty much, because I think there's a much more liberal sort of approach to architectural education abroad compared to what happens here, and I think that's also tied back to how things are built here. Things here take a lot slower, although we build a lot. Things take a lot slower. We build in a way that's in situ, rarely uses prefabrication. There's a huge dependency on cheap foreign labor, and because of that, there's a mismatch between the theories and education of architecture to the actual implementation of it. And because of that gap, there is an area of resistance to what it should be, towards what it could potentially be. And this is only because the product still remains the same as it was 20 years ago, compared to where we need to be to face all these coming issues.
Right. I mean, interesting. Just maybe I give one further anecdote. When I was at Nottingham, we had a student there who really was in love with Norman Foster, and he would just produce reams and reams of Norman Foster drawings. And the chair of architecture was a big fan of Norman Foster as well. For him, this was his top student. But it was interesting that when he applied for a job at Norman Foster with an incredible portfolio of Norman Foster drawings, he was rejected by Norman Foster. It was kind of like, I can do that. And meanwhile, I had someone in my studio. I had to do the outlandish thing. They didn't mind too much if I did something crazy. And I had a student who he had a rocking horse that dispensed milkshakes on an AstroTurf platform above Smithfield Market. And it was completely crazy, very kitsch, but actually quite beautiful. He was the one who got the job at Norman Foster. In other words, they're looking not for repetition, but for imagination. And they go round. I'm sure that the demo can confirm this. When there's an end of year exhibition at the Bartlett, they go around and put the Foster's card on certain things, give us a call, right? They're looking for the slightly crazy guys who are going to bring that imagination in. Anyway, sorry. Okay. So, yeah.
Maybe I'll quickly add on to that and slowly divert that question, but it's still quite relevant to if the practitioners would still like to talk, because you've talked about how, actually, I think it's quite true. In this regard, I feel like I had a bit of a, well, I wouldn't say culture shock, but because all of us here, we've been educated abroad at some points as well. So for me, when I did my undergraduate at the Bartlett, I think what I remember very vividly, and at that point in time, it didn't make sense to me as a young student going to architecture, thinking I'll just be doing buildings, I'll be an architect, woo. I ended up questioning, like, why are they giving me these kind of projects? Because these projects, I think I remember, at least in first year, they were trying to like break the boundary of like what is architecture by basically giving us projects that are not very architectural. So there's some sort of like urban, like, I think I remembered, well, I think, I don't know, I guess I could say it. I've been basically like, I made some little fold origami thing, and it was like a mapping project, but then I was kind of like curled up in the corner. I think it's like the monitor bar area, and I was kind of just using plaster to like, they told me to, create some sort of sculpture, and I was kind of getting the imprint of the road because it's a medieval street you see in London. So it was kind of crazy. And at that point, I was just like, what's going on here? And it was the same for my other peers who responded with, more like fashion and sewing and anything that was basically not architectural. And it's only slowly later on, maybe in the final year project, then it started feeling architectural. But we're supposed to at least utilize those art interdisciplinary skills. And of course, I got into the Bartlett with A-level fine arts. They didn't want maths or physics for that one. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And so I guess it was about breaking that idea of what is architecture in the first place. And I think it's only after, like in hindsight, like now that I'm teaching, I realize how important it is to not just break that boundary, but basically I appreciate what they've done to me. It's in a full circle now. I was confused, but now I understand completely, because I think it goes back down to design thinking, because we still need to do the research, we still need to do the conceptual design, we still need to think about, materiality, because architecture is, I tell my students, if they remember any of my lectures, but I do tell them, you have to be almost master of everything, whether it's material or fashion or music even. If you know all of that, architecture is basically your, the whole package. But you have to be master of, I guess you can be master of all. But anyway, that was my culture shock, I suppose. And the fact that they are, I wished, I don't know, I hope at least we could push the boundaries a bit more about what is architecture in the future of, Malaysian education and, in our courses. So yeah, and maybe I should direct the questions to the other two practitioners as well, especially Kaiyi, because I think when you were talking about the pain of architecture and this change, I had that crisis, I had that identity crisis myself. Trust me, I know. So I think it's quite an interesting journey for both of you, and Sam as well. You've published a book. You're playing with generative AI. So I think both of you have also very interesting thoughts about this. So over to you.
Should I go first? Yeah, I think you were mentioning about master of all. Yeah, actually, I did include that. Supposedly, I did include that into my slides, but I took it off because of time constraint. So I feel like architects tend to be jack of all trades. We tend to be, to know everything, to control everything and whatnot. But it came to me soon. I realized that I have to eventually become a master of one and really hone that one skill and start to monetize that when I old enough, and then I'll take 10 years. So my target is almost before age of 30, I'll be jack of all trades, and then I use a span of 10 years become a master of one and be really really expertise on one skill and start making money off that skill. That's my goal. Pretty straightforward. Just now we were talking about how architecture being perceived in a Malaysia landscape. I would say the struggle that I mentioned just now when I was practicing, I tend to see the pattern is like, in Malaysia, the value, like how we value architecture is very not very good, I would say. It's like, you see, when people talk about architecture, it's just about, it's like a shelter. We build a building so that people could live in it. And then when we talk about, experimentation or like R&D to developers or like potential client, they will probably not very interested in that, or they will not very invested in that because they find that it's not a crucial or like it's not a necessity for their business or like to the people, because it's a luxury to have all this R&D in the first place if they have to pay for all of this thing. So I guess that's the mentality of Malaysians developer who will be the funders of the project most likely. So I think that is why I guess that's the reason why we are progressing slower than the other countries. And besides that, I think we should embrace more of our own culture, and especially our vernacular architecture that we are slowly forgetting it, because I see most you see, usually in UK they have a really strict rules of preserving their old buildings, but whereas in architecture whereas in Malaysia we always bulldozing all these old buildings and make way for new buildings to come in, for all the high rises, which really heartbreaking, because I saw like that there are really old, like it's still not really old, but like 50s 1950s building being bulldozed like one after another, and just so it make way for like a high rise to come in, which I think is a bit, I don't know, I don't know I don't know how exactly to express this, but I feel like the lack of appreciation of our own culture is quite deadly. It's quite deadly, and because when you look at Vietnam, for example, they have a really strong identity. They embrace bamboo as much as they can, so that when you think about Vietnam architecture, you can they made it international. Those architects made it international that we can straight away scream out their names, their local architects. But what are Malaysians? Do we have that kind of architects? Do we like the who embrace Malaysia architecture that much, that we can straight away, that made it to an international level, that we appreciate so much, that we be so proud of it? I don't think we can. I don't think we have any that yet. I mean, we do have a few, but you get what I mean. Like, it's not like that celebrated enough. I feel like that's a shame, because Malaysia is such a rich and I only appreciate the uniqueness of Malaysia after I studied abroad, to be honest. And I look back, oh, we are that special. Okay, yeah, I think I guess that's enough for me. Sam, do you want to add on?
Thanks, Kaiyi. So, I mean, in relating to architecture education, I think what's missing in Malaysia is I would like to see like a Bauhaus style approach, like what Neil suggested, like a more holistic approach to design as well. Because I think there's a lot of siloness in Malaysia, like architecture doesn't overlap in terms of the industry and also in terms of like the crowd itself, like fashion doesn't go into like the architecture school and then you don't see like interiors reacting and then so everyone's working in silos and even when they are working in the industry they're still kept in silos, so that doesn't really help in terms of reimagining a different type of architecture because people just tend to keep to their paths and no one ever really strays from it. So I think really diversifying the influences in architecture school is really important. Yeah, that's it for me.
Maybe I could just ask. I want to ask Siti a question because I really appreciated your presentation and it was very kind of theoretically aware. But there's a problem, right? In the sense, as soon as we start talking about post-decolonizing things, inevitably the problem is this. I mean, we've just spoken about how you need to go to London to learn how to break down that siloed understanding of architecture and come back, which is, of course, a very colonial understanding. You go to London and come back, right? I mean, and the problem about some of the kind of decolonial discourse, the post-colonial discourse, is that it is itself centered in the West. That Edward Said was in Colombia. Gayatri Spivak, one of the key figures, is in Colombia. Kenneth Frampton, I taught at Columbia. He was one of my colleagues there. He's the one who's telling us we should, get into critical regionalism. We're being told by someone in New York, or you're being told by someone in New York, to do critical regionalism. And then, of course, Homi Bhabha is at Harvard, and so you've kind of I've always felt slightly uncomfortable about the fact that in a world that should be more post-colonial, nonetheless, there's a deference to the post-colonial discourse that exists in certain places. Is that fair, Siti? You did actually refer to a local philosopher whom I didn't know, but you mentioned him. What do you say to all that?
So I think this is an extremely important question, and I feel that a lot of Malaysians battle with this in terms of their identity. And I don't think it's an easy question to answer, but my perspective on this is, if I were to simplify it, Malaysians or people from the global south probably need to take 3 steps back, maybe outside of their country, to actually see the real situation of what it is in, and then go back, have that realization, and then change it from within. And I think this is probably the simplest form of answering a very complex question. I think in comparison to my colleagues here, I am probably the only one that is fully educated in Malaysia. My degree, master's, and PhD is all from local public universities, so I have a very different perspective. I'm very critical, obviously, of the education system here, but it is not without people that are extremely talented. And I think that there are certain thresholds and certain catalysts that they need to actually break through for us to be a little bit more progressive and a little bit more experimental. Some of the things that Edward Said, like you mentioned, I think in the introduction of his book from Culture and Imperialism, I think it was in the beginnings of one of the 10 pages at the introduction, he actually mentioned something that I think a lot of people will resonate with. He says that he is Palestinian, but at the same time, he is also American. He's educated in Palestine. He is also educated in the US, and he has these both identities. Because of these two identities, that allowed him to be extremely critical of the West and put forth theories because he had that insight of what the West and how it operates. So stories such as the one that, if someone can help me here, the one where the main character is called Pip.
I'm not sure.
So just to summarize, it's about an orphan, and how he became, from an orphan, he became a gentleman. And the whole process is put everything in a really wonderful light, because he sailed off to the colonies, etc., etc. And because of all these processes that he went through, he came back and became a gentleman. But if we look from a different perspective, if we put on a global south lens, he actually was able to become rich and become a so-called gentleman through exploitation of the colonies, through the riches that he gathered from there. So I think this is such an interesting take that Edward Said had, and I feel that a lot of us should actually have this lens and be extremely critical. I'm very happy that you mentioned Le Corbusier, and how he is obsolete. For me, he is really obsolete, and a lot of his works do not work. What he built in Brasilia, in India, it is devoid of soul. It is devoid of the commons, the people. He did not have the people in mind. And of course, I could go on for 10 hours in talking about this, but I feel that certain things, such as the so-called modern masters, is something that we have to be extremely critical about instead of always putting them in a positive light, because in this day and age, their architecture just does not work anymore. That's it. Yeah.
No, so actually, what was interesting, I mean, I think now I've slightly shifted my opinion on the basis of what you were saying, in the sense that almost the important one thing was to take yourself out of your familiar background, to be able to sort of see your own culture from a kind of critical perspective. I think if you are totally immersed in it, it's quite difficult to be able to understand it and appreciate it. And I think someone was saying, once I left Malaysia, I began to understand and appreciate what Malaysia was. So maybe the issue might not necessarily be so much about post-colonialism or whatever, but about being able to sort of see things from a kind of an external perspective and from a critical perspective. I don't know. This is a stupid anecdote, but when I was about 10 years old, my parents lived in Germany, and there was a football match, and it was on TV. In those days, it was terrestrial TV, and we had the radio, and it was like, I was 10, right? I was watching the football match, and I understood the German, I understood the English, right? And there was the English forward, the David Beckham or whatever it was of the day, took a shot at goal, and the German goalkeeper saved it. Now, what really surprised me, there were two different accounts of reality. One was the British guy who said, "Oh, unlucky, unlucky," and then the German goalkeeper said, "What a fantastic save!" And at that point, I suddenly think, "Oh, this is interesting. There are different ways in which to see the world, and therefore, to take yourself out of that silo, to see it as a silo, is maybe the most productive thing in some senses." But interestingly, you're the one person who's left Malaysia to go to China, right? Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, this is I think something we should to be continued, Emma. I think this has really opened up some interesting questions. I think I completely forgot that Ken Yang was from Malaysia as well. But certainly some very interesting sort of perspectives on things. And one thing I would say in terms of just about the Bauhaus was I taught, not at the Bauhaus because it's not a school of architecture. Next door to it, there's a thing called the Dessau Institute of Architecture. It has a different name now. And that attracted a lot of students from less wealthy countries because it was free. And we had the most incredible students from Bangladesh. And I began to realize that, the top 2% in any country is good. The top 2%. And it's not necessarily a question of having the money to go and pay to go to Harvard or something. You're going to find this everywhere. And I think today we got a good sense of what interesting thinking and imagination is going on among those trained within an architectural environment in Malaysia, and the different journeys that you've had, which is an interesting one. So Emma, I think this is something I'd say, hopefully we can continue this in some way and have some more sessions. Maybe we have one in Malaysian or something like that. I don't know. But it's, for me, it's always super interesting to find out, to reverse the typical trend of listening to the supposedly hot spots of architectural culture and actually look out and see what's happening in places like Malaysia. And certainly it was great to come and to visit your country in May. I don't know whether, Emma, you got some kind of final comments to make to wrap things up.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, please come back. Yeah, we can. I mean, I was about to say, I mean, it was nice. And remember that time we kind of took you on this walk and there was like Masjid Jamek, and I don't know if you found that Masjid Jamek reference in Suffian's work. But anyway, actually, there's a lot to say, and it could go on for hours about how we frame or how we go about with our Malaysian history. How's Malaysian history? I mean, as a historian and theorist, my interest is in how it's been taught. Of course, there's a textbook history, which I call it textbook history. So it's that conventional, modern, West-centric route that we are, that we are exposed to, or we pick up a book on architecture history, and that is basically the Western canon of architecture history. But how, and then also, yeah, in general, I think there's that aspect, and also the whole idea of decolonization and what do we do with this Malaysian identity? Who are we? What are we? There's no such thing. I mean, of course, when we read, when we start thinking about these concepts, there's no such thing. We have to discard the idea of purity or authenticity, or what is that one identity in the first place? Because we have to acknowledge everyone is hybrid. So, and more so, I mean, evidently more so, I think, in Malaysia, but there's that. And also, yeah, I think we didn't really get to talk too much about this, or maybe we just need a part two. But I think in general, which it has been touched upon, the idea that our, the BIM uptake, or in general, software's BIM, for instance, the uptake is slower than, let's just say, our counterparts in Singapore. I think they're only using like level 1, level 2, up to level 2. But how do we really fully utilize the potential of these like generative AIs coming out? Of course, everyone's using it, but how do we fully utilize it? I want to see it being pushed some more. It's the same with BIM or fabrication. I want to see it being pushed some more in this country. Of course, I like, I'm sure that it is out there, but yeah, I like to see some more like experimentation, some more, like cross disciplines responses. So that's kind of my, I don't know, my running thought. And yeah, I think, we come back to Malaysia, and we nice to have a part two, really.
Yeah. But I get the sense that Malaysia's in good hands, in the sense that I think, I mean, I was once at a review at SIAC once, and there was some student who wasn't really standing up for himself, and Hernandez Diaz Alonso said to this guy, says, "Come on, defend yourself. We're going to be dead soon." And I think in a way, the Malaysian architectural culture needs to kind of feed off the young ideas from people like yourselves to try and because it needs to be revitalized continually, and as culture itself is something that is dynamic and alive. And I think I'm glad to see that there are these ideas that are alive and well there, and that Malaysia's in good hands, even though I wouldn't necessarily say it's what most people understand as architecture. It is a diverse sort of range of opinions, but it's good to see that, and also the sophistication of some of the theoretical debates and things in this presentation. So we need to do some more. I mean, I'm particularly interested in hearing more from female voices in Malaysia, because frankly, the future of architecture in most of the world is female, because almost all the students, certainly of my students, are female these days. So I think we have to look to a world that is changing. I would just simply say one other thing is that the question about decolonization or post-colonialism and AI is coming up at ASCAD, which is the Arabic Association for Computational Design. And I think this remains an ongoing debate. I think we've solved everything, but at least we've asked some questions. And I think that's the important thing to do, is to ask the questions. So let's try and reconvene at some other point and start and address a different kind of topic or take it from a different angle, but keep the debate going, because it's super interesting for us to be in this kind of discussion, and I think it's very important to keep these lines of communication open. So thank you so much. Great work, everyone, and well, to be continued.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this platform. Really appreciate it.
Well, I just, let me just say, Digital Futures, just a brief aside. One thing that, it came out of Dessau, of understanding that really talent was evenly spread. That was one thing that became very, very clear. And the second thing, and this is more a personal thing. I'm not religious, but I went to a monastery. I studied at a monastery, and the monks there, who wore black and had no money, maybe that's why I became an architect, wear black and have no money, but they had this view, a very interesting view, that they had no possessions. And I actually came out and I asked them a few years afterwards, and I had left. I came back and said, my understanding of your outlook is that possessions are not important, because you don't actually own anything. Because when you die, you can't take it with you. So we're effectively just borrowing things. And therefore, let's not get so obsessed with what car you've got, what house you've got, whatever. And it's interesting that Digital Futures operates in this kind of way. No one pays anyone anything, but we're sharing our passion. And that has been the real revelation that's allowed Digital Futures to operate with a zero budget, but at the same time be something that's very successful in sharing ideas and sharing our passion for architecture. And I think today we'd established that architecture has to be seen in a much broader way, whether it's bamboo or whatever. But anyway, it's thank you. I'm glad that Digital Futures is appreciated for what it is. So thank you, everyone. To be continued. Thank you, particularly thank you all the speakers, and thank you especially Emma for putting this together. The start of something hopefully will grow with time. So thank you. And just to say briefly,
thank you.
Next week on, we're going to have a series of tutorials on AI and a series of theoretical debates about AI intelligence with a number of very significant people from the world of AI, and Carla Ratti, who is the curator of the Venice Biennale this year. So thank you, everyone, and hope to see you again when I come back to Malaysia, Emma. Okay.
Hopefully. Thank you very much. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Good night.